fabulous chapter on public sector banks, great data on the inefficiency of capital put into public sector banks, but it ends with a little bit of a whimper. No big suggestions on how to go about changing this except to say fintech and ESOPs as a way to incentivize better performance. Surely we need to do a little bit more than that.
So I'll give you some more. No. So there are more. There is another chapter, by the way, in volume 2 on banking as well. So here we were making a simple case that one, Indian banking sector way too slow, and then we have done some comparisons between private and public banks that we have done. But there is a volume 2 chapter on monetary and banking. Please look at that. And if you look at that, you will see that we have talked about, for example, monetary transmission, but we have also talked about an important, very important reform. Please look at it. It's called bilateral netting. Would you like me to take you through what this is about?
I would love to hear that out. Sorry, I haven't gotten to that chapter, to be honest.
Okay. So look at this because it's a very important reform. Now, bilateral netting relates to the following problem. Let's say you and I are banks, okay? I have an exposure of 100 rupees to you. You have an exposure of 90 rupees to me, okay? Now, the current capitalization requirements mean that I will have to put capital aside in accordance to the current norms for 100 rupees. You will have to do the same thing for 90 rupees, right? So 190 rupees worth of positions will have to be, exposure will have to be dealt for in the capital requirements. However, the net position in the financial system, the net risk in the financial system is only 10 rupees because, I have a net position to you of 10 rupees. You have no exposure to me at all because, I have greater exposure to you. So from a risk perspective, the only thing we should care about is this net 10%. But we can't look at it this way in our current legal environment because we do not allow for bilateral netting. We allow for multilateral netting, which is a different thing. We do not allow for bilateral netting. Now, if we did allow for bilateral netting, which by the way is the global standard, worldwide bilateral netting is the standard. Every country, major country that has Basel type capital requirements also has bilateral netting. Now, if we allow this, suddenly a huge amount of capital will get freed up because we are sitting on capital. We can suddenly net off and don't have to keep so much capital. And by the way, the ratios are large. In the example I've given, instead of 10 rupees worth of capital, you are having to keep 190 rupees worth of capital. So the ratios are very large. Now, what will be the benefit of this? One of this is, of course, we'll free up a lot of capital, which can be used for lending, leveraging, etc. But there is another benefit which is even greater, which is that we can finally begin to develop a credit default swap market. Now, why is this important? This is important because without a credit default swap market, you cannot have a corporate debt market. The reason you do not have a corporate debt market in India is because we do not have a CDS market. Now, of course, CDS itself requires that SEBI and others create a regulatory environment for it. But once a healthy CDS market is created, a corporate debt market will also exist. So this is a very important thing. It will not only free up the banks, but it will open a completely new area of financing.
So Sanjeev, this is permitted, you're saying, under Basel norms. So what is preventing it would be some RBI rules or something like that?
No. So So Basel norms assume that you already have bilateral netting. They assume it because most other countries already have it.
Okay.
We do not have it. So we need not a RBI rule, we need a law looking at bilateral netting and allowing for it.
Okay, so then the next question there is the government working towards that if this is something that the government has to do?
It is certainly, we have suggested it. So now it's up to the government and market participants to debate the issue seriously and do something about it.
Fabulously interesting. Thanks for flagging it off. Let me ask you about some of the more tried and tested, or at least some of the ideas that are already out there in public. There has been that proposal to do a bank investment company. The reason I bring it up is that you have proposed something similar for CPSEs, where you're saying you create a new governance structure and you have an independent board and an independent company which holds all the CPSE holdings. That was earlier suggested for banks but never done. Is that idea for banks not feasible according to you, or is it on the table just not repeated in the survey?
Banks have to be dealt with somewhat differently because there are different laws. There is a Nationalizing Act, and also we are doing something there through mergers and so on. So we didn't bring it up in this other context, but we did make a case that for those which are sort of areas where government intervention is not needed, there is a very good case for allowing for full-fledged privatization. There may be certain areas like telecommunications where you may still need a government player for a variety of geostrategic and security reasons, but there are a whole bunch of areas where the government should not be there, and there we need to be unapologetic about doing privatization. And we have given evidence to show that this is something that is a good thing. By the way, you may have also seen a renewed effort being made to privatize Air India that is also underway. So this is something we take quite seriously. And there is, of course, the wider issue about the economic survey, which is that the theme this time is wealth creation. And we have talked, said that wealth creation has got to be a central theme. Prime Minister himself has said, unless you can create wealth, you cannot redistribute it. But unfortunately, our mental mindset is still about control, socialist kind of approach to everything. I think the time has come to unapologetically reject that and move on to a different way of doing things.
Sure, that did come across as a theme. Sorry, I have a couple of more specific questions on the financial sector, Sanjeev. So the reason I asked that question about banks is that, there's no mention of lowering government stake. Past surveys have talked about reform as, a package of 3 Rs, etc. So what does reform to you of the financial sector mean, since we are putting so much of the emphasis of the slowdown on the financial sector? To you, what does reform mean? I don't see much about reform in the big sense, privatization or new governance structure within this.
I think this approach that you have, that it must require some one big bang thing to get it going, no. What we did in the last 5 years is impose controls and supervisory control, regulatory control on the banking system, which for a variety of reasons had suffered from all kinds of poor credit culture, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code as well. So all of this has meant that the banks have now substantially been cleaned up. The point we are making is that now that enough of a infrastructure has been built from a regulatory supervisory perspective, the time has come to focus on growing the banks. So that is the point being made. Much of this, by the way, has to be done by the banks themselves, including, by the way, the private sector banks, not only just the public sector banks.
All right.
And by the way, one important part of that is to fixing the business of fixing the monetary transmission mechanism, by the way, which is there also in volume 2.